We predicted this yesterday. At 0-6 going into the bye week, something was going to give.
Check it off the list.
The most predictable thing to do when you're looking at the checklist of things coaches will do when the block is hot is to change play calling. Do something with your coaching staff to shuffle it up because it's clearly not working. And that's exactly what Frank Reich did yesterday when it was reported. And then he had a press conference announcing that Thomas Brown, somebody that every NFL insider will tell you is going to be a head coaching candidate this offseason. Everybody's got their eyes on him, that he is going to be taking over the play calling duties for the offense and Bryce Young.
Clearly, David Tepper, Scott Fitterer, Frank Reich, they're not on the same page.
No.
And I think now Frank Reich is in this unenviable position where every week he's talking himself in circles, and he probably doesn't really know what to say at this point.
No.
To be like, yeah, this was the plan all the time. Like, no. If you're running hot and you're 4-2 or 5-1,
he's absolutely not giving up the play calling.
You're not giving up the play calling situation. And we've had long conversations about the value of the person who calls plays for your football team. They're the most important person on your staff. And so for Frank Reich to be like, hey, I am going to live and die with what I do because I believe strongly. Remember his own background in Philly, that he gets to the Colts. Like, okay, I have no problem with that. And I think all along he was trying to say that in the interview process during the draft and then in the preseason and the run up to everything. And yes, it was cool to have Jim Caldwell here. It's cool to have Dom Capers here. It's cool to have all of the other consigliaries that he has here that he can go consult with. But ultimately, I think he wanted it to work because that's how I would want to die. I'd want to die with my own skills. I'd want to die with my own decisions. So I understand where he's coming from. Now, you say Thomas Brown is an up-and-coming star in this business.
That's what the insiders tell me.
I would just remind you that he was Mark Richt's offensive coordinator at the University of Miami. Now, they were successful in those 3 years. And yes, he did. He has the one thing on the checklist that everyone needs now, an experience with Sean McVay.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. So we'll see what he does.
But let's be realistic. Let's be realistic about what this means for the Carolina Panthers going forward and what they can do in the bye week. The bye week makes sense on multiple levels and not just because of the 0-6 start. I'll give Frank Reich the benefit of the doubt that they might have circled in pencil the bye week as a way to hand things off to Thomas Brown to reassess. Because what do coaches love to tell you on open weeks? Oh, well, we self-scout. We take an assessment of what we do. How can we tweak things? Obviously, we need the rest. Everybody gets a break, but now we're going to take this opportunity, and you never know what's going to happen the rest of the season. Every coach says this. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in that regard. However, I think we can all agree that Frank Reich calling the plays was vanilla. Frank Reich calling the plays led to speculation, and all you have to do is just watch the speculation that Frank Reich was coaching the team he wanted rather than the team that he had. That Frank Reich was trying to run an offense for what he's typically run offenses for, which is the big traditional quarterbacks with Bryce Young and a skill set that wasn't necessarily going to translate. So I do believe that David Tepper in these weekly meetings told him, dude, this isn't working. You need to stop being stubborn, and you need to have Bryce Young be coached by Thomas Brown and run an offense that is more suited for Bryce Young. Because you and I are not tape eaters, okay? We are not the type of people that go to NFL Access, watch the All-22 film, screen grab it, and put it on social media. I'm not saying that as a knock. I'm just saying we are not those type of people. But those people do exist. Shout out to Josh Norris, who's over at Underdog Fantasy, and he's a Panthers fan. He's from North Carolina, so he's a Panthers guy. At the end of the day, I think he used to do stuff for Black and Blue Review, the old
Panthers blog.
The old Panthers blog. So he had done the thing where he screen grabs and GIFs, and every single thing that he pulls shows you, again, to be realistic about what's going forward. The offensive line has regressed. There's injuries, obviously, but there's also been regression for guys like Ike Ekwonu. In certain situations, the wide receiver group, which we keep kind of wash, rinse, repeating with our opinions about this wide receiver group, they're not open. There was a graph making the rounds about separation for receivers. You know what the Dolphins do with their speed and their scheme? They make guys open. You know what the Panthers are doing with their skill set and their scheme? Not making guys open. So there's often a response of, okay, you want to bang on Bryce Young. here is this data. Here are these examples. Look at them and then come back to me and tell me, where is Bryce Young supposed to throw the ball in these situations? What is Bryce Young supposed to do when he's got a dolphin on his back? All right. Now, in some of these cases, if you're looking for the positives, Bryce Young's actually making some pretty decent throws, even under pressure. But he's making throws to, again, a wide receiver group that sometimes is just not open. It goes back to that stat earlier where Bryce Young was actually completing throws in tightest windows with receivers who were not necessarily open. So to be realistic, again, back to Thomas Brown going forward, I don't expect there to be this, Mike McDaniel level offensive scheme or a Shanahan level scheme him up, Brock Purdy suddenly an MVP candidate. But if you believe in Bryce Young, you then put him with the guy you're going to keep him with. Because the worst thing you can do in the NFL, and we saw this, we've seen this so many times in college, how many different offensive coordinators are going to go through? How are you going to ruin a quarterback with all these offensive coordinators? So there's no reason why David Tepper can't afford Thomas Brown. If you believe he's the guy to help Bryce Young get along, that the rest of the season isn't necessarily about competing for the NFC South. It's about making sure you're developing him and putting him in a position to succeed next year and beyond. That's where we're at.
Not breaking him.
Don't break him.
I'll say this. You said no Mike McDaniel, no Shanahan. I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree. Saw a great clip from Steve Sarkisian. Do you remember Tyler Feldman used to work over in Greenville?
Yeah.
He's down in Austin now.
Okay.
And posted it on his timeline. I love following the stuff that he does. I love it when people leave the nest and we see them in different spots.
Yeah, it's
right?
always cool to see.
Sarkisian, he was asked, do you borrow plays from other people? I think the word was steal.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, yeah.
Great artist steal, man.
He goes, absolutely. He goes, I didn't create football. I don't make any pretense that I invented football.
Right.
So if you think back to the preseason, the plays that I liked from Bryce Young were from under center.
Mm-hmm.
And the staple of the Shanahan offense, the younger Shanahan offense, and which is really from his dad, is the play action. You get the quarterback on the move. And part of that is having that strong run game. Part of that is having the threat of a runner. And I think, again, the premise of Miles Sanders was he would be that runner. You saw the offensive line last year. You would be able to get people guessing on play action downs, which are early downs, by the way. Not third down, when everyone knows in the building that you're throwing.
Right.
Okay. But I do think this is the time to steal. And I think this is the time for Thomas Brown to look at the stuff with Sean McVay that he used with Goff, the Goff stretch. Because remember, they went to the Super Bowl with Jared Goff as a young quarterback. And that wasn't because of him. It was because of how it was schemed up. It was because of Todd Gurley. And again, you had the threat of Gurley. But it wasn't because they had super blazers out there running around, running routes. They had good receivers, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
Robert Woods had a really good year that year. But they weren't like this blown away skill set Dolphins toy chest. This was a normal team that had an outstanding defense, but they were schemed up on offense. The success that I saw in obviously glimpses in the preseason was when you had to guess, when it was a play action situation. And more importantly, it's when you put the quarterback on the move. That is a staple of Shanahan, is getting the quarterback out on the move. Mm-hmm. Go back to Jake Plummer for the dad.
Oh, geez.
Replacing Elway at the Broncos, right? Yeah. Even Elway, if you really want to get into it. So I think that's the way you put him in the best position. So I do. I think it is. Let's go copycat. Let's go figure out some things that work. And maybe Thomas Brown is the right person for that job. Because sometimes if you're Frank Reich and you're kind of stuck in the Doug Peterson, Andy Reid mold of, hey, we're that 3-step West Coast drop, get it out of your hands kind of guy, then you need to ask for help. So let's see what Thomas Brown does. I think that most important job for Thomas Brown going forward is not to
don't break him,
Bryce Young, because I think you're right. Because we're gonna get into this when we talk about Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert. It's easy right now to sit here and go, and we're gonna see CJ Stroud soon.
Oh yeah,
it's easy to sit here and say CJ Stroud is better, and he is.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just sit there and be like, well, that's it.
There's a long game here, man.
Like Bryce Young is done.
Yeah.
No, there's ways to help him.
There's a long game.